Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
And God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding, his church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
Welcome to another edition of the Q Ideas Podcast. I'm Gabe Lyons. I'm so glad you've joined us here in July. It's hot in the South where we are located, and it's hot, it seems, all over this country. But I know for many of us, it's the middle of summer, and not only are the temperatures hot, but we're realizing that that continued polarization in our country doesn't seem to flame out. It always has another topic, an idea that starts to create more and more challenges in how we get along, how we listen to one another, how we find common ground. And that particular issue over these last couple of weeks has been the abortion topic and the Roe v. Wade topic and the ruling that took place recently through the Supreme Court. I just want to comment on it for a moment. We're at 49 years of this law being in place that many estimate over 60 million children. 60 million children. If you think about 49 years old and under, so millennials, some of Gen X and Gen Z, you're talking about 60 million individuals that don't exist in our society today because of abortion. And this is a moment worth celebrating. And I know there's a lot of conversations about what we need to do now, how we can show up more. That's certainly been a conversation we've been a part of for over 17 years at Q Ideas. Is how do we help people in these situations so we reduce abortion? But this is a moment. This is a moment worth celebrating for Christians and for those who have prayerfully been bringing this to God and saying this is unjust. This has been a horrible thing in our society. It's an awful thing that we've just endured and even gotten complacent and used to. And now it's being removed from the laws and it's being pushed back to the states. And you probably know by now, several states are going to continue to outlaw it. Others are going to still allow it. But I just think it's a moment to give thanks to God for his faithfulness, for something that was unjust, that literally was murdering and killing so many children, to now be something that's much harder for that to take place. And so, of course, there are many more things to be done. There's a lot of work the church has been doing. I think the church has been doing a great job of coming around and helping in the issues of foster care and adoption and doing so much work. Our faith communities do so much work in our society to help solve these problems socially. And that work's just going to continue and has to continue. And so the topic we're talking about today gets right into that. Just 2 months ago, when we hosted our Culture Summit, we had a talk called Adoption is an Option. Understanding that the Roe v. Wade decision was coming and that there was a chance that it could get overturned, we wanted to put our energy towards, well, what can be done? How do we be a part of helping alleviate the challenges that so many mothers feel, so many people and families feel about whether they can afford to have a child or whether their circumstances are such that they don't want to bring another child into the world and they don't realize that adoption is an option. I know our family has adopted and it's been a beautiful transition into our home. A little girl from China who at 5 years old moved into our family. And of course it's disruptive. Of course it changes all the dynamics, but it's been a beautiful invitation, I know, for our family into a new journey with God and helping us walk that out. And she has been such a delight. And I know there are so many challenging stories. We have so many friends who've adopted as well, where it doesn't always go as smoothly as you'd hope. And there are challenges. And this is part of what it looks like to be part of a kingdom, part of people who are willing to sacrifice, who are willing to go through some suffering and do different things and rare things just to help other people and to help these children have a life. But in the conversation and talk that you're going to hear today, we're going to dig into what does it look like to consider adoption as an option? And how do we create more access for adoption? How do we tell that story so that more and more people consider it for their families, and that more and more new moms and people who have just found out that they are pregnant can then understand this is a real legitimate option. I know in our family as well, with our son with Down syndrome, who's 21 years old now, that there are so many families in the U.S. that want to adopt children with Down syndrome. In fact, there are long waiting lists for people who want to adopt children with Down syndrome. And part of that is because they understand that so many of these children have been aborted or terminated when in the womb they have been told as parents that their child's going to have this genetic disability. And the fear and the worry about what that life might look like will drive somebody to go, I don't know that that's best for me or my family or even for this child. Well, that's where the compassion comes out. And so many people raising their hands and going, we want to adopt a child with Down syndrome. Those are the kind of success stories. We're going to need more and more of that. We need waiting lists of families who are going, we are willing to take a child into our home so that as children are born, this option is on the table and it becomes part of our public conversation about this issue of abortion and what we can do as we move forward. So I want to introduce you to who's going to be bringing this 9-minute talk, and it's Elizabeth Kirk. She's a researcher and lecturer at the Columbus School of Law at the Catholic University of America. She has her JD from Notre Dame and previously the Associate Director of the Notre Dame Center for Ethics and Culture, as well as roles at the University of Kansas and Ave Maria University. And I think what you're going to appreciate about Elizabeth, and she'll reference this slightly at the beginning of this talk, is she's also supporting a movement called the Opt Institute. And the Opt Institute is dedicated to helping more and more people understand that adoption is an option. It's an incredible website at optinstitute.org that shares so many stories of those who've been adopted, people you've heard of, but maybe you didn't realize their story is one of adoption, and all part of a movement to help more and more people start to encounter adoption as an option. Let's listen in now.
John and Lori are witnesses to the gift that adoption is and to the courage of their birth mothers. Adoption is also an integral part of who I am. I'm a law professor, I teach family law, and I have a special interest in adoption law and policy. But I'm also an adoptive mother. My husband and I have welcomed 4 children through adoption, 3 of whom we welcomed at birth. Their births, not ours. And the littlest guy we adopted through foster care. And although my story is a bit different than John and Lori's, I was also adopted by my dad when I was very little. And his gift of fatherhood has enormously shaped who I am, and quite honestly has taught me about the way God the Father loves each of us. So I am that kid too. But there's a strange problem about domestic infant adoption that people, I think, don't think about. There's a sort of soft stigma against it. So while most people have a very strong positive view of adoption and they view birth mothers as heroes, the reality is that very few women choose to place their child for adoption. So it might be a good choice, even a brave and noble one, for someone else. And I would say that this problem is a cultural one, and one that's deeply connected to the theme of the Culture Summit. You are here looking for signs of life, signs of hopefulness and beauty amidst painful and difficult circumstances. And you are also here because you're interested in engaging serious and difficult questions about issues that matter. And this year, as the Supreme Court may be poised to overturn the nearly 50-year-old precedent of Roe versus Wade, many people are talking and wondering about what a post-Roe world might look like. And adoption is often mentioned by people all across the ideological spectrum as something that everyone can get behind, as common ground. In fact, according to the National Adoption Attitude Survey, 86% of Americans have a favorable to extremely favorable view of adoption. But is it really common ground? Each year, less than 20,000 infants are placed for adoption. In fact, most women who choose not to parent viscerally reject adoption as an option. They say they could never give their baby away. They report that the thought of their baby being out in the world without knowing if it was being taken care of or by whom would induce more guilt than having an abortion. And the people that advise them, their family members, medical professionals, reinforce this abandonment narrative. So while less than 20,000 infants are placed for adoption, each year there are more than 1 million abortions. Those odds are 50 to 1. So despite society's very strong, positive cultural view of adoption, the reality is that it's not an option for women. And meanwhile, for every one of those babies placed for adoption, nearly 50 couples wait to adopt. So what can we do to start the conversation and to help more people realize that adoption is an option? I can tell you about 3 initiatives that I'm involved with that are trying to move the needle and create conversation around this problematic dynamic of the soft stigma of adoption. Opt Institute is a national research foundation and think tank that's dedicated to studying this dynamic and to promoting infant adoption. I Am That Kid, you just saw the video, that's a video campaign that's aimed at giving adopted children a voice to proclaim gratitude for the courage of their birth families and to say, it is good that I am here. And Adoption is an Option is a movement of adoption-focused organizations that are committed to changing the view of private infant adoption. My hope is that by becoming aware of this 50 to 1 ratio, people will actually start to question their thinking about the actual choice of adoption, not just the theoretical idea of it, but the actual choice of it. And ask, what is it about our culture that stigmatizes a mother and makes her feel guilty for continuing her pregnancy and placing her child for adoption? Why don't more women choose it? We have to admit, adoption occurs in brokenness. It involves an enormous sacrifice. But as John and Lori witnessed, and as I witnessed to you today, adoption can be the occasion for great healing and great blessing. We know from the example of Christ himself that pouring out oneself in love for the good of another is always redemptive. Adoption is, as Pope John Paul II called it, a great work of love, not abandonment, a great work of love. Adoption also reminds us that all children are gifts, that all loving parenthood is sacrificial, and that all of us are brothers and sisters to one another in God the Father. So I want to share with you a personal story that has forever stood for me as a sign of life, of the beauty of adoption and its capacity for healing. My husband, Bill, and I were at the hospital ready to return home when our first child was born, and we left the birth mom's hospital room. We wanted to give her and her family, some time alone together. And so we walked down the hallway, and we were just filled with so many emotions. We were overjoyed because after so many years of longing for a child, we had finally held our little son, who was and is an answer to many prayers. We were also nervous because we wanted to live up to the trust that his birth family had placed in us by choosing us to be his parents. And we were also heartbroken because we had come to love the birth mother and her family, and we knew, even if we couldn't fully understand, the pain of the goodbyes that they were sharing in that hospital room. And so we were whispering all these things to one another, and a woman at the nurse's desk motioned us to come over, and we went over thinking there was some paperwork to fill out, and she said, "You're the adoptive parents, right?" And we said, "Yes," and she said, "I'm a birth mom." It was the last thing I expected her to say. And she went on to tell us that she had her son 40 years ago, that she wasn't ready to be a mother. She said it was not an easy decision, but it was the best decision I ever made. She went on to tell us about how she had later married and had more children, and her grown son contacted her. And she said that he was thriving and happy, and the whole time she spoke, her face was just radiant with joy. I am a birth mom. And so at the very moment that my son's birth mom was giving him a kiss and her last goodbye, we were being given this glimpse of the beauty and the capacity for healing that adoption had in it. So what I want to say is that we need more witnesses like that mother and like John and Lori to the beauty of adoption, to the fact that it is a sign of life. Signs that cry out that brokenness is not the end of our story, and that healing and redemption is possible even in the most difficult circumstances. Signs like more women who are proud to say, I am a birth mom. And signs like more people who get to say, I am that kid. Thank you.
Well, I appreciated Elizabeth's approach to this, as well as just the reminder of how huge the numbers are. Less than 20,000 infants placed for adoption in a year, but there's been over 1 million abortions. So the 50-to-1 odds, that's what we're talking about. How do we start to create within our communities, our churches, our friend groups, our relationships, the idea that adoption is normal? It shouldn't just be an exception anymore. This is going to have to become a normative part of how we live our lives. And so I want to encourage you, go to optinstitute.org. I want you to watch some of those stories. Consider watching it with your family. Listen back to this talk as you grapple with what is our role in society? How do we be a part of the solution now? How do we not just complain that things have changed or be people who are concerned about areas that you can't make a difference in and say, I'm going to be a person that makes a difference? So you can watch this talk as well at Q Media. You can watch many other conversations we've had around this topic of abortion over the years. You can get a free trial at qideas.org/trial, and you can have entire conversations around multiple talks we've had on this topic over the years. But go to optinstitute.org and check out their work and their resources as we all play a part in helping more and more of our friends and our relationships know that adoption is an option.